The man giving the toast at my father's wedding called me a thief in front of 150 guests. He didn't use the word. He didn't have to. He raised his champagne glass, looked out across the vineyard, and said, Robert lost everything in 2016 because someone in his own family sold him out. But instead of pressing charges, Robert chose grace. Because that's who he is. Every head in the room turned toward the back row. Toward me, the uninvited son. The ghost who hadn't been in a family photo in 9 years. I sat with my jaw locked and my hands folded and my heart hammering so loud I was certain the woman next to me could hear it. I thought, stand up, walk out, drive home, never look back. But I didn't. Because I knew something that nobody else in that room knew. Not the guests, not the bride, not even my father. I knew what Trevor was about to say next. And when he said it, the champagne glass in his hand started shaking so violently that the wine spilled down his sleeve. Before I explain how I knew, I need to take you back. 9 years back. To a borrowed laptop, 5-page essay about the French Revolution, and the night a 17-year-old kid lost his entire family over a set of timestamps he didn't understand. But first, something that happened 11 days before the wedding. Because this is the part that changes everything, and nobody saw it coming. Least of all me. I was sitting at my desk at work. I'm a systems analyst at a cybersecurity firm in Oakland, which is ironic in ways I'll explain later, when a notification popped up on my second monitor. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was Re-Demis 2016/Walsh. No body text. Just an attachment. A scan document, a wire transfer confirmation from January 2016, showing a payment of $350,000 from an offshore shell account to Datamark Solutions. The sender field on the transfer listed a name I'd been staring at in my father's old company records for 3 years, Trevor Walsh. My father's co-founder. His best man. The man who'd loaned him $40,000 after the collapse and helped him rebuild from the wreckage. I stared at that document for a long time. Then I closed my office door, sat back down, and started doing what I'd been trained to do for a living, trace a digital trail. I need to explain something. I didn't end up in cybersecurity by accident. After what happened to me at 17, I became obsessed with digital forensics. Not in a dramatic revenge movie way. In a quiet, grinding, practical way. I studied computer science in college. I interned at a security consulting firm. I got certified in forensic analysis. I learned how timestamps work, how remote access tools leave traces, how file access logs can be manipulated or misread. I built my entire career on the skill set that could have saved me if anyone had bothered to apply it 9 years ago. My therapist once asked me if I'd chosen this field to prove my innocence. I told her no. I'd chosen it so that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else. That was mostly true. But there was a locked drawer in the back of my mind, and inside it was a question I'd been carrying since I was 17. If I didn't leak that source code, who did? 3 years ago, I started looking. Quietly. On my own time. Using skills I'd spent a decade acquiring. I pulled public records on my father's old company. I mapped the corporate structure, the access credentials, the network topology from what I could reconstruct through SEC filings and old court documents from the bankruptcy proceedings. I identified every person who'd had access to the company's codebase in March 2016. There were only 4. My father, Trevor, a senior developer named Marcus Yee, who'd left the company in 2017, and an intern who'd been in Portugal during the leak. Marcus was clean. I tracked his digital footprint thoroughly, and his alibi was airtight. That left Trevor. But I had no proof. Suspicion isn't evidence. I knew that better than anyone. Then that email arrived. 11 days before the wedding. And everything I'd been building for 3 years suddenly had a foundation. Now let me take you back to the night that started all of this. March 14th, 2016. A Monday. I was 17, and I had a history essay due the next morning that I hadn't started because that's what 17-year-olds do. My laptop charger had died 2 days earlier. My father's machine was on the kitchen counter. He was asleep. I took it upstairs, opened a browser, typed 5 pages in Google Docs about the Jacobin faction and the Reign of Terror, printed it on the hallway printer at 2:30 a.m., closed the laptop, brought it back downstairs, and went to bed. Total time with the machine, about 2 hours. I didn't open a single file on the hard drive. I didn't know where his work files were stored. I didn't even know what source code looked like. I was 17. I was writing about Robespierre. 3 days later, my father's startup, 4 years old, 72 hours from closing a $6 million Series B round, imploded. Someone had leaked the complete source code of his flagship product to his primary competitor. The leak was traced to credentials stored on his personal laptop. Investors pulled out the same afternoon. The company drowned in $2.3 million of debt within a week. When the forensic audit came back, it showed file access at 2:47 a.m. on March 14th. The window when I'd had the machine. Here's what I understand now that I didn't understand then. The forensic audit was surface level. It logged file access events, but didn't distinguish between local activity and remote connections. Someone accessing the laptop remotely through a pre-installed tool like TeamViewer or AnyDesk would generate the same timestamps as someone sitting at the keyboard. The audit showed that files were opened. It didn't show how. A competent digital forensics investigator would have caught that distinction in about 20 minutes. But my father didn't hire a forensics investigator. He hired an IT consultant who ran a basic log check and handed him a printout with a timestamp that matched the night his teenage son had borrowed his laptop. Case closed. My father confronted me on a Saturday morning. My mom was out. He stood by the kitchen sink holding the printout like it was a verdict. He didn't ask questions. He delivered conclusions. You leaked my code. Flat voice. Controlled fury. Worse than screaming. Why? Because I missed your soccer tournament? Because you wanted attention? I told him the truth. I borrowed the laptop to print an essay. Google Docs. 5 pages. The French Revolution. I never opened a single file. I didn't know how to access his company's repository. I was a kid who needed a printer. He stared at me. Then, pack a bag. No discussion. No investigation. No benefit of the doubt. Just expulsion. My mom came home from running errands to find me on the front steps with a duffel bag, calling my Aunt Linda. The front door was already locked behind me. I lived with Aunt Linda in Fremont for 2 years. She was a guidance counselor, quiet kind, didn't push. I finished high school from her spare bedroom. My mom visited every weekend. She filed for divorce within 6 months. She told me the breaking point wasn't the accusation, it was my father's refusal to even consider he might be wrong. He chose being right over being your father, she said. And he wasn't even right. But here's what was happening behind the curtain while I was grieving in my aunt's guest room. And this is the part that took me years to piece together. Trevor Walsh had been in financial trouble since late 2015. He'd overextended on 2 real estate investments that went sideways, and he owed nearly $400,000 to creditors who were running out of patience. In January 2016, 2 months before the leak, someone at Datamark Solutions, the competitor, reached out to Trevor through a mutual business contact. They wanted the source code. They offered $350,000. Trevor said yes. He used a remote access tool he'd installed on my father's laptop months earlier, ostensibly for IT support when Robert was traveling, to extract the files on the night of March 14th. The same night I was printing my essay. Same machine. Same 2-hour window. My Google Docs session and Trevor's remote extraction generated overlapping timestamps in the access log. When the audit came back pointing at that specific time window, Trevor realized that the teenager who'd borrowed the laptop, was his perfect alibi. He didn't have to frame me. The circumstances framed me for him. All he had to do was stay quiet and let my father's grief and fury do the rest. And that's exactly what he did. For 9 years. Now let me tell you what those 9 years felt like. Not the version where I'm a tragic hero enduring noble suffering. The real version. The ugly one. I wasn't invited to a single family gathering for 9 years. Not one. My father told every relative his version of the story. The one where his troubled teenage son, resentful about missed soccer games, had sold proprietary code to a competitor out of spite. Nobody questioned it. He was Robert Chin, the brilliant engineer, the immigrant success story. I was just a kid with a motive and a timestamp. My name was removed from holiday card lists. My grandmother's 90th birthday. I called the venue directly and was told the guest list was closed. By my father. At his own mother's milestone, he'd rather erase me than risk an uncomfortable conversation. She passed away a year later. At the memorial, he stood on one side of the room and I stood on the other, and he looked through me like I was made of glass. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was the active cruelty disguised as indifference. When I graduated college, my mom showed me a text he'd sent that morning. Congratulate the thief for me. 7 years later, and he was still branding me. That word, thief, traveled through the family like a virus. Cousins I'd grown up with stopped returning calls. An uncle I'd been close to told my mom he didn't want to get involved. My grandfather, before he died, told my aunt he was disappointed in James. He never asked me what happened. None of them did. I reached out to my father twice. At 21, I called his number. He picked up. I got 4 words out. Dad, I just want, before the line went dead. At 24, I tried from a different number. He let me finish one sentence. Then, lose this number. The next day, I was blocked. My therapist told me something that stayed with me. You can't build a bridge to someone holding a flamethrower on the other side. I stopped trying. I redirected all that energy into the only thing that felt productive, learning the systems that had been used to convict me. Meanwhile, my father rebuilt. He remarried, a project manager named Diane, and had a daughter named Sophie. He started a new company with Trevor as his primary investor. I watched Sophie grow up through social media. I couldn't stop checking. Birthday parties, piano recitals, camping trips. Then I found a recording of my father's speech at Sophie's high school graduation. He stood at a podium and talked about showing up for your children, about how nothing matters more than being present. I watched it at 2 a.m. in my apartment and felt something inside me go cold and still, like a pilot light clicking off. He never missed one of Sophie's games. Not one. I stopped checking his social media after that. Some things you can only look at so many times before they stop hurting and start calcifying. Here's what I haven't told you yet. Something that's hard to admit. There was a period, about 2 years in, when I was 19 and struggling through my sophomore year at State College, where I started to wonder if my father was right. Not about the leak. I knew I hadn't done that, but about who I was. Whether I was the kind of person who could have done it. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m. replaying that night, and the memory would blur at the edges. I remembered opening the browser. I remembered Google Docs. But had I clicked on anything else? Had I opened a folder by accident? Had I somehow, without meaning to, triggered something that gave someone else access? The forensic report said files were accessed at 2:47 a.m. I finished my essay around 2:30. What happened in those 17 minutes? I didn't remember closing the laptop immediately. Maybe I'd browsed. Maybe I'd clicked around. Maybe I'd opened something I shouldn't have, and the guilt I felt wasn't about what I'd done, but about what I couldn't remember. That doubt, the doubt my father had planted in me, was the cruelest thing he ever did. Because for about 6 months, I wasn't just living as an exile. I was living as someone who wasn't sure he deserved to be angry. My therapist pulled me out of it. She made me write down, step by step, exactly what I remembered from that night. Then she asked me a question that changed everything. Even if you had accidentally opened a file, which you didn't, would that be the same as deliberately leaking proprietary code to a competitor for profit? I stared at her. No. Then why are you carrying your father's accusation as if it's your own? That was the day I stopped doubting myself. And it was the day I decided to learn everything I could about digital forensics. Not for revenge, for certainty, because I never wanted to feel that kind of confusion again, about myself or about anything else. The financial toll was its own kind of violence. My father had been contributing to a college fund for me since I was born. When he kicked me out, he froze the account. I found out when my freshman tuition bill arrived and the fund my mom had been counting on didn't exist anymore. I worked 2 jobs through college, nights at a copy center, weekends stocking shelves at a hardware store. I graduated with $42,000 in student debt and a degree in computer science that I'd earned one exhausted, underpaid semester at a time. My father, meanwhile, was funding Sophie's private school tuition and setting up a trust for her college education. Same man. 2 children. 2 entirely different definitions of what a father owes. 3 years ago, when I started my investigation, I told myself I was doing it for closure. That was a lie. I was doing it because I'd spent a decade building the exact skill set needed to find the truth, and I was tired of pretending I didn't want to use it. I traced Trevor's financial history through public records, bankruptcy filings, property transactions, corporate registrations. I found the shell company. I found the offshore account. I found the timing of his real estate recovery, a suspicious influx of cash in mid-2016, months after a man who'd been drowning in debt suddenly wasn't. I had a map of the crime. What I didn't have was the murder weapon. And then something happened that almost ended my investigation permanently. Trevor found out. I don't know how. Maybe I'd pulled one too many public records tied to his name. Maybe someone at the county clerk's office mentioned it. But 6 months into my research, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Trevor. His voice was friendly, casual. The voice of a man who had no idea he was a suspect, or the voice of a man who absolutely knew. James, it's been a long time. Listen, your dad mentioned you were doing some work in cybersecurity. That's great. Really great. I just wanted to reach out and say, if you ever need anything, a reference, a connection, anything at all, don't hesitate. He chatted for 3 minutes about nothing. Then he hung up. I sat at my desk with my heart pounding and realized 2 things simultaneously. First, Trevor was checking whether I was getting close. Second, he wasn't worried. He was confident that whatever I found would be circumstantial. And he was right. Without a direct financial link between him and Datamark, everything I had was just a pattern. Suggestive, not conclusive. That phone call was the most frightened I'd been since the night my father told me to pack a bag. But it was also the moment I understood Trevor's fatal weakness. He was arrogant. He believed he was smarter than everyone around him. He'd watched a 17-year-old take the fall for his crime. He'd loaned my father money with the proceeds. He'd rebuilt his career on stolen capital, and he thought he'd gotten away with all of it. That arrogance would be his undoing. I just needed one piece of hard evidence. I kept looking. The anonymous email 11 days before the wedding gave me that. The wire transfer confirmation. The document that connected Trevor's shell account to Datamark Solutions with a dollar figure and a date. I ran the metadata on the scan. It had been generated on a commercial copier, the kind you'd find at a FedEx office or a UPS store. I couldn't trace the sender, but I didn't need to. Because 3 days after that email arrived, I got a phone call from a woman named Megan who said she was Rachel's sister, Rachel being my father's fiancée. Megan told me that Rachel had found a folder in my father's home office labeled DMS 2016, containing printed correspondence between Trevor and someone at Datamark. Rachel had confronted my father with it. He'd refused to believe it. They'd fought. Rachel had almost called off the wedding. Then Rachel went to Trevor directly, showed him the emails, and he'd broken down. Confessed everything. Rachel gave him a choice, confess publicly at the wedding, or she'd go to the police. And that's when I realized something that made me pull my car over to the shoulder of the highway. The anonymous email I'd received, the wire transfer document, hadn't come from a whistleblower or an old colleague. It had come from Rachel. She found the evidence in the same house where I'd once printed an essay about the French Revolution, and she'd sent it to me because she wanted me to know the truth before I walked into that vineyard. She wanted me to be ready. Megan confirmed it in the parking lot 40 minutes before the ceremony. She sat in my passenger seat, fidgeting with her clutch purse, and said, "Rachel wanted you to have it first. She said if anyone deserved to know before the room did, it was you." I asked why Rachel hadn't just told my father the truth herself and forced the issue privately. Megan said Rachel had tried. My father shut it down. He said Trevor was the only person who never abandoned him, Megan told me. He couldn't accept that the one person who stayed was the one who destroyed everything. I sat in my car and felt the full weight of that sentence. My father would rather keep believing his son was a traitor than accept that his best friend was. Wait for the speeches, Megan said. Trevor chose this. Let him do it. The ceremony was beautiful. I think. I couldn't focus on any of it. I sat in the back row watching the back of Trevor's head, feeling like I was watching a countdown timer on a device only I could see. Every few minutes, Rachel would glance toward the back of the room, nod at me, past me at the exit, like she was calculating whether Trevor might bolt. He didn't. He sat perfectly still through the vows, the rings, the kiss. A man waiting for his own execution with the calm of someone who's already dead inside. Then the reception. Then the speeches. Trevor stood up. Charcoal suit. Champagne glass. Steady hand at first. Robert and I have been through a lot together, he began, smooth and practiced. In 2016, Robert's company was destroyed. Someone leaked proprietary code to a competitor. It cost Robert everything, his savings, his company, his family. He paused. The room was silent. For 9 years, Robert believed it was someone he trusted. Someone in this room. Another pause. I could see his jaw working. He was right that it was someone he trusted. But it wasn't his son. The glass started shaking. He set it down on the table. It was me. My father rose from the head table. His chair scraped the stone floor, a sound that cut through the silence like a crack. His face cycled through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, collapse. He looked at Trevor, then at Rachel. She nodded. Then he turned to me, and I watched his face do something I'd never seen in 26 years of being his son. It crumbled. Not anger, something deeper. The structural failure of a man who just realized he'd spent nearly a decade punishing the wrong person. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Trevor kept talking. The debt. Data marks offer. The remote access tool. The timestamps overlapping with my laptop session. How he'd realized I was his perfect cover and decided to let a 17-year-old carry the blame rather than confess. And the detail that detonated the room. My father's new company, the one he'd rebuilt from scratch, the one that was supposed to represent his resilience, had been seeded with money Trevor had laundered through a consulting firm he'd started with his Datamark payout. The company my father was proudest of had been built on the profits of his destruction. The room erupted. Voices rising. Someone asking about police. Rachel standing with her hand on my father's arm. Diane holding Sophie, who looked like the floor had disappeared beneath her. And in the center of it all, my father walking toward me. Slowly, carefully, like I was something fragile that might vanish if he moved too fast. He stopped 3 feet away, tears on his face. Robert Chin, the man who'd told me to pack a bag, who'd called me a thief for 9 years, who blocked my number, who'd erased me from birthdays and holidays and his mother's memorial, standing in front of me, opening and closing his mouth, searching for words in a language he'd forgotten. James. Just my name. Then his knees buckled and he caught himself on a chair. I didn't move. Not because I didn't want it. Because 9 years of grief had frozen inside me like a geological formation. It wasn't going to thaw because one man finally said my name without the word thief attached to it. I stood there and let him look at me. Not the ghost. Not the thief. Not the cautionary tale he'd been telling at dinner parties for a decade. Just me, his son, standing upright in the back of a vineyard in Napa, watching his father learn the truth at his own wedding. I wanted to tell you that we embraced, that he apologized and I forgave him, and we collapsed into each other's arms while the room wept. That would make a better ending. But here's what actually happened. I looked at my father and I said, I need to step outside, and I walked through the door. The parking lot. California dusk. Orange and purple sky that looked like it was trying too hard to be cinematic. I leaned against my car and breathed. My mom found me within minutes. She was shaking. She grabbed me and held on like the ground was unstable. I always knew, she said. I always knew it wasn't you. I told her I knew she knew. I told her that was the only reason I'd survived it. An hour later, my father appeared. Jacket off, tie loose, aged a decade in 60 minutes. He sat on the curb by my car without asking. 4 feet between us. The closest we'd been since the morning he told me to pack a bag. He spoke to the asphalt. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Ask forgiveness for something I can't forgive myself for. I let the silence stretch. Then I said what I'd been building toward for 9 years without knowing it. You didn't just accuse me, Dad. You erased me. You turned me into a story, the ungrateful son who betrayed his immigrant father. You told it at dinners and holidays, and it got easier every time. And every time you told it, I got a little more invisible. You didn't just believe Trevor over me. You needed to. Because if I was innocent, then you'd thrown away your own kid for nothing. And you couldn't live with that. So you kept watering the lie until it felt like truth. He didn't argue. He nodded. Then he said something that I'll carry for the rest of my life. I dreamed about you. Every few months. You were small again, and you'd fallen, and I couldn't pick you up because my arms wouldn't move. I'd wake up and tell myself you deserved what happened. Because if you didn't, he stopped. He didn't need to finish. I knew. If I didn't deserve it, he was the villain of his own story. And Robert Chin couldn't survive inside that realization for 9 years. So he'd built an alternative reality where I was guilty, furnished it with timestamps and motives, and lived there. The evidence was thin. Somewhere deep down, he knew it was thin. But it was all he had, and he clung to it the way a man in open water clings to anything that floats. Sophie came outside later. 19. My father's jaw, her mother's eyes. She stood on the steps and looked at the two of us sitting in the parking lot like strangers sharing a bench. She walked over and said quietly, "Nobody told me. They said you did something bad when I was little, and I was afraid to ask what." I said, "You were a kid. That's not on you." She sat on the curb next to our father. 3 people in a row. A family configuration that had never existed. The daughter he raised, the son he discarded, and the man who was starting to understand the cost of both. Here's where I've landed. I'm not reconciling with my father. Not the way people want me to. Not the movie version where we hug at the vineyard and the credits roll over a montage of rebuild holidays. What Trevor did is criminal, and the legal system will handle it. Rachel's attorney has already filed. But what my father did, choosing certainty over curiosity, conviction over investigation, a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable question, that wasn't Trevor's crime. That was his. Trevor lit the match. My father burned the house down himself, every day for 9 years. But I'm not sealing the door shut either. Sophie and I had a 2-hour phone call last week. She's smart, sharp, makes the same face I make when she's working something out. We're getting lunch next month. My mom smiles differently now, with her full face, not the careful half smile she'd been wearing to family events for a decade. Rachel wrote me a long message. She said she'd sent me the wire transfer because she believed that the person who'd suffered the most deserved to know the truth first. I appreciated that more than I can express. I haven't written back yet. My father calls every Sunday. I've picked up 3 times. The conversations are short, careful. 2 people testing ice on a frozen lake. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. I think Rachel told him not to. He asks small questions. How's work? Am I eating enough? Do I still follow the Premier League? The questions a father asks when he's trying to relearn the shape of a child he stopped looking at a decade ago. Last Sunday, he asked if I remember the essay. The French Revolution. The one I printed at 2:47 a.m. on the machine that broke us apart. I said I remembered. He asked what grade I got. I told him, A-. My teacher said the section on the Jacobins was the strongest analysis she'd seen from a junior. He went quiet for a long time. Then, I wish I'd read it. I said, I wish you'd been there when I got it back. 10 seconds of silence. Then he said goodnight. I said goodnight. And that was it. Here's what I know. Trevor stole $350,000 and let a 17-year-old carry the blame for 9 years. My father chose the version of reality that protected him from his own guilt and called it justice. The truth didn't surface because the universe bends toward fairness. It surfaced because a woman sorting tax documents in a home office opened a folder that should have been shredded years ago, and because she loved my father enough to question the story everyone else had accepted. The truth showed up 9 years late at a vineyard in Napa, in a charcoal suit, holding a champagne glass that wouldn't stop shaking. I'm not the thief. I never was. And the strongest thing I ever did was spend 9 years learning how to find the truth and still be standing when it finally arrived on its own.